All right, guys, what we're going to look at next is how you would solve a two-step equation that is involving decimals. So just wanted to review a few things with you. The good news is your process is going to be the same as we've already been talking about, where we're going to get rid of the constant first, and then we're going to get rid of the coefficient. So just a few things to refresh your memory on that. So we're first going to separate our equation just to help us out, because what we do to one side, we do to the other. And then this just is a friendly reminder: when we divide with decimals, we're going to slide our decimal however many places to the door, and we're going to go and slide that many more. So I'll come back to this little thing in just a minute to help you guys out. So a couple of things that I want to refresh your memory on is we are going to be using long division with decimals, and so we'll set that up together on a piece of paper to work that out, but we're going to actually let you check your work with your calculator since we want to make sure you have that process. So let's go ahead and get started and see what we're going to do. So you definitely want your piece of paper to work these problems out so that you know how to do that as well. So again, if we have 4/10 x plus 2 9/10 is equal to 1 5/10. What we see first, if we knew what the variable was, with order of operations, we would multiply by 4/10, then we would add 2 9/10. So just like what we've been talking about, the first thing we need to do is get rid of that constant. So it doesn't matter if it's a decimal or an integer or a fraction or a whole number, anything like that, we're going to get rid of the constant. So the opposite of positive 2 9/10 is negative 2 9/10. Okay? So your rules still apply. We're going to cross these out to get our 0 pairs. Then on the left, we have 0 4/10 x. Then 1 5/10 minus 2 9/10. Now let's think about this if this were whole numbers. If this was 2 and if this was 3, you couldn't do 2 minus 3. So remember, subtracting is really adding the opposite. So this is a positive, and this is adding a negative to each side. So when the signs are opposite, we subtract. Then we're going to take the value of who there are more of. So if I have 2 9/10 and I need to take away 1 5/10, we line up our decimals when we add and subtract. So 9 minus 5 is 4. Bring that decimal down. 2 minus 1 is 1. So that would be 1 4/10 over here on the right. However, there were more negatives, so my answer would be negative. And we're going to let you guys double check your work with the calculator. So let's prove that that's going to be negative 1 4/10. Okay? So if I have 2 9/10, I'm sorry, 1 5/10, take away 2 9/10, we see that we got that part correct. So we want you to check with your calculator, but make sure you're showing your work on a separate piece of paper. Okay, so again, our brains don't naturally think in decimals. So if we were trying to get from 4/10 by skip counting, 4/10, 8/10, and so on, it would take us a little bit harder for our brain to think about that. So that's what we're going to show our work. So your coefficient, your number in front of the variable, is 4/10. It doesn't matter what kind of number is in front of the variable. If it's in front, that means multiply. So the opposite of multiply is divide. And you divide by the same number you were multiplying by, that coefficient of 4/10. So that's going to cross out and get x by itself. And before I do the long division, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. I don't want to forget that sign. So let's go ahead and work this out. On my scratch piece of paper, if I have negative 1 4/10 divided by 4/10, remember numerator over denominator, your numerator goes inside, that's called your dividend, and your divisor goes outside, that's called your divisor. So I have 1 4/10 divided by 4/10. So what we need to do, because we don't naturally skip count to 4 from 4/10, that's what we're going to use that little phrase for. We're going to slide however many places that decimal to the door and go inside and slide that many more. So right here, this is the door, that house part of the division sign, if that helps you out. So we're going to go and we slide 1 to the door. We go inside and slide 1 more. So this sliding 1 to the door is like multiplying by 10. And what we do to the outside, we're going to do the inside the same amount of times. So we've rewritten this to be 4 as the divisor and 14 as the dividend. So 4 can't go into 1. 4 can go into 14 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12. Now remember, we've slid that decimal to now 1 4/10 is the whole number 14. And behind every whole number is a decimal and a 0. Actually, infinite amount of zeros. So we're not changing the place of this number by writing from 14 to 14 and 0/10. Okay, so we're going to bring that decimal up. Then 4 minus 2 is 2. 1 minus 1 I can't do. So after I subtract, I bring down. So 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. So we have a prediction that a negative 1 4/10 divided by 4/10 is not just 3 5/10, but that's why I like to do my sign over here first. We're going to say is negative 3 5/10. So there's a lot of elements of this one problem built into one. We have adding, subtracting with decimals. Remember that when you add and the signs are opposite, you actually have to subtract and take the sign of who they're more of. We have dividing with a negative and a positive, resulting in negative sign. And then last but not least, we have division with decimals. So there's a lot of steps of this built into one. That's why we've been reviewing and building up to this. So let's just double check that we got this right. So we had negative 1 4/10. We just divided by 4/10, and we got the answer right. So use the calculator to check. But this is how you show your work to show the process, okay? So if you don't have that work, it's not going to help you out, and you're also not going to get credit. So make sure you're working them out. All right, let's try one more, and then the last one you can try out on your own and make sure that you check with your teacher to see how you're doing. So let's try one more just to get you guys to practice. Okay, let's try this one since this one was adding the constant. This one is subtracting. So let's look at that one. So this one, you can try out on your own if you like, and double check with your teacher, make sure you got that answer right. All right, so we've got 5/10 m minus 3/10 is equal to 1 55/100. Again, we want to get this variable by itself. So the constant, the number just by itself, is negative 3/10. Okay, so the opposite of a negative 3/10 is a positive 3/10. Now, keep in mind, you have to line up the place value. So this 0 is in the ones place, so I need to put it right underneath the 1 that's in the ones place. This 3 is in the tens place, and so is that first 5. There was no number in the hundreds place, so we just put a placeholder of that 0. So this cancels out, which is one step closer because we got 5/10 m by itself. And then 5 plus 0 is 5, 5 plus 3 is 8, 1 plus 0 is 1. And we line up the decimals, so we got 1 85/100. Now we are going to divide by my coefficient. And my coefficient is 5/10. Opposite of multiply is divide. So now we're going to get m by itself. And we're going to check this out. And then I'm going to make sure we substitute with these two to make sure we're 100% correct. So now we have 1 85/100 divided by 5/10. So the numerator goes on the inside, 1 85/100 divided by 5/10. So we're going to use our little phrase, slide 1 to the door. We go inside and slide 1 more. We only slid this decimal once because there is only one number after the decimal. We need to make this a whole number. We need to make it 5. Okay? Just because we made this number a whole number doesn't mean this one becomes a whole number. We have to do the same amount on the inside as we did on the outside. So now the decimal is behind the 8. So that inside number, the dividend, is 18 5/10. So go ahead and bring up that decimal. 5 can't go into 1, so we could put a 0 or an X. 5 goes into 18 3 times. 3 times 5 is 15. I subtract and I bring down. And then 5 goes into 35 7 times. And 7 times 5 is 35. Okay? So that means my answer is 3 7/10. Okay? So here's what we can do to check it. We've already figured out, use our calculator right here. So if we had 1 55/100, we got rid of that negative 3/10 with adding the opposite, which is 3/10. There's that 1 85/100. Then we're going to divide by the coefficient because we see multiplication when it's in front, so we have to do the opposite, which is divide. We're going to get 3 7/10. So it's very, very important that you take your time and show your work on these, as well as double check to make sure. So let's double check to make sure we're right for this final answer, since we had some decimals moved around. So your original part was 4/10 times x, which we got was negative 3 5/10, so 3 5/10 negative. So that's the product right here. If I were to add 2 9/10, it's balanced. Each side is worth 1 5/10. Okay, so we can check that first. We substitute in 5/10 times our value of 3 7/10. So that's 1 85/100 for the product right there. Subtract 3/10. Yep, and that's what we got. So we know that we're correct. So try this problem on your own and then check in with your teacher to see if you got it right.